What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Mikey McNuggets coming at you on a Thursday afternoon. It is a rainy, disgusting day in Cleveland, and that is hopefully the opposite of what we are going to witness on Sunday when the Indiana Pacers come to Rocket Arena to take on the number one seeded Cleveland Cavaliers. This is your Cavaliers weekly stream right here on the Bleacher Report app. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. And the focus of today's stream is to preview the upcoming Cavs vs. Pacers series and dive into how Darius Garland's injury is going to impact both teams in this series, how it's going to impact Cleveland and what Cleveland wants to do both offensively and defensively, and how it's going to impact what Indiana wants to do both in stopping Cleveland and trying to score against Cleveland. But here's the latest on the Darius Garland injury. As of this afternoon, the Cavaliers had media availability earlier. Kenny Atkinson was asked about Darius Garland, his status for game one. His answer was pretty simple. I don't know yet. We're going to play it by ear. We are going to see how Darius feels. He's still on a day-to-day basis scenario. It is purely a pain tolerance issue. He's not going to injure his toe anymore. He's not going to magically be healed from this big toe sprain. The only way to heal it is to take months off, get off your feet, rest and recover. And while the Cavs have had about a week between games 4 of the first round series and game 1 of the second round series, that is not nearly long enough for Darius Garland to heal his toe. So it's a pain tolerance issue. How much pain is Darius willing to go through to be on the court with his brothers and compete against the Indiana Pacers? It's not a is Darius tough question. It's a how much can Darius play at a level which the Cavs need him to play at through the pain without sacrificing all the things that come along with Darius being Darius. For Darius to be at his best, he needs to be quick. He needs to be able to push off both feet, left and right, which gets him into his crossovers, his in and outs, his hesitation moves, his go stop and go. When you push off, and if you're sitting at home watching, whether you're standing up, whether you're driving, take a step. What do you push off with every single step you take throughout the day? Your toes. What is the biggest of all your toes? The big toe. What is the most powerful of all your toes when you plant, pivot, and cut? Your big toe. So it's going to be painful for Darius. I'm sure they'll give him a shot, numb it up before the game, but that only works to a certain extent. You're still going to feel things as you go throughout a course of a 48-minute basketball game. And for Darius Garland, it's the question of, can you still be effective while playing through that pain? Because Indiana, in the first meeting between Cleveland and the Pacers this season, pressed full court. And it kind of took the Cavs out of what they like to do offensively. It forced them to slow down, play a little more methodical. And it's no surprise that being taken out of their offensive rhythm and missing a bunch of shots, Cleveland lost that game relatively easily. Indiana handled them well. Now, 3 days later, they rematched and Cleveland beat them. So it's not the end-all, be-all blueprint on how to beat the Cavs, and it doesn't mean the Cavs can't beat the Indiana Pacers. And both of those meetings took place before DeAndre Hunter was in the fold, which changes the complexion a lot. But it goes to show you that even with a healthy Darius, that's what Indiana likes to do, and that's what Indiana thought was the best way to slow down Cleveland. And now with an injured Darius and a shorter rotation from Kenny Atkinson, the options and the ball handlers to break Indiana's press, to get Cleveland into offensive sets, to navigate the offense, to set up the bigs, to run through all the actions and the back cutting and the screening and the down screens, the pins that Cleveland has been so effective at using this season, becomes a little slower and slower. And if they are going to full court press the Cavs, when Cleveland does get into its offensive action, they'll be getting into the flow of things with 15-14 on the shot clock and not 18-19. And that 5-second difference may not sound like a lot, but over the course of a couple possessions, that's the difference in being able to run through 2 actions on offense before pulling it out and going ISO or pick and roll, or going 3 times through an offensive set before pulling it out. And every time you put a defense through a defensive rotation where they guard one of these offensive sets, you create more mismatches and switches and advantages to attack. So not having that third run through due to the fact that it took you a little longer to bring the ball up the court, it's a pretty damn big benefit for the Indiana Pacers or for the defense or for whatever team is trying to slow down the offense. So I'm not sure if Darius is going to play game 1. Personally, I think if I was Kenny Atkinson, I would sit Darius until the Cavs lose. And if that means you win the first 2 at home and he sits out both, well, great. That's another 4 days of rest for Darius to be off his toe. If they lose game 1, then you bring him back for game 2. If you win game 1, sit him and you play game 2. And if you lose, then you bring him back for game 3. I know for the big picture run for Cleveland that Indiana is no slouch, but they have bigger aspirations in the second round. And while at the same time, you can't overlook the Pacers by any means, you do have to have in the back of your head the connotation and the thought process of, we can't fire all our bullets now because we need to save some for later. And game 1, not game 5, not game 6, not game 7, but game 1 of the second round of the playoffs is not the time to unload the chamber. And pushing Darius to an extent that is past his pain threshold and asking him to carry too much of a burden in a game that, while it matters, and I'm not trying to downplay the importance of game 1, but in the big picture, in the grand scheme of things, the Cavs can certainly come back and win the series if they lose game 1. I wouldn't push it. I'd play it conservatively. And although Darius is a warrior and I know he wants to be on the court, I'd make sure he feels as close to 100% as he possibly can before I'd ask him to get back out there and guard and break the press. You know, Indiana is going to do what Boston had done, what the Heat tried to do, what the Celtics did in their matchups this season. When the Cavs are on defense, they're going to attack Darius. They're going to put him in pick and roll situations, try and create switches where Darius ends up on Siakam or Obi Toppin or one of their bigger guards, even Tyrese Haliburton in pick and roll situations, and force him to navigate through screens and stay in front of guys and battle in the post. And Darius, while not the greatest defender in the world, is also not a terrible defender. I think his rep is a lot worse than in reality. But on a big toe that may be hindering his lateral quickness and his ability to slide and change gears, he may actually be a bigger defensive liability in this series than he has been in the past. And I love the whole narrative that somehow the Cavs are better without Darius Garland. Let me tell you, that's a giant load of bull you-know-what. I'm not going to say the word here. It's a family-friendly app on the Bleacher Report family, and we love being part of the Bleacher Report content family. But the idea that the Cavs are better without Darius is just absolute baloney. Why does it have to be the Cavs are better without Darius? Because they beat a Miami team that had absolutely no business being in the playoffs in Miami in 2 blowout fashions, when the truth of the matter is those wins, yeah, Cleveland played great, but Miami had quit. They threw in the white towel. Like, yeah, the final scores were horrific. They were murder scenes. The Cavs snatched their souls, but they would have done that with Darius too. Darius being out had nothing to do with Miami's downfall. Their defense was great, yes, but it would have been great with Darius out there too. Miami has no offensive players. You can let Tyler Hero hunt, so be it. He was missing shots. Everyone else was missing shots. The whole swap, our defense got better because Darius isn't out there. They put Sam Merrill in the game, and I love Sam Merrill. I'm sitting down one-on-one with Sam Merrill tomorrow to talk about the emergence of him as a playoff contributor and all the different things he does for this team that go unnoticed. But guys, it's not like you switched out Darius Garland with prime Dennis Rodman or prime Gary Payton, some elite defensive backcourt player. No, you switched him out with Sam Merrill. And who's a better defensive player, Garland or Merrill? You could ask 20 people, you're going to get 10 that say Darius and 10 that say Sam. So the whole idea that the Cavs are better without him is a giant load of crap. It is. And against Indiana, I do think the Cavs need Darius to win this series. I don't think they need him for 7 games, but I don't think if Darius were to miss the entire series, that Cleveland would have a cakewalk to the Eastern Conference Finals. I think it's going to be a tough series with Darius, even tougher with him hindered. Indiana can counter a lot of what Cleveland likes to do. The Cavs bench has been their superpower all season. When their first substitutions come in, and Kenny switched back and forth, whether he takes out Donovan and Evan first or Darius and Jarrett. But when those two come out, it's DeAndre Hunter and Ty Jerome who come in, and Sam Merrill. And in the regular season, it was Okoro and Dean Wade and all these guys, right? And most second units just can't compete with that kind of firepower. And over the course of a season, how many games did you see where the starters and the other team starters kind of played to an even wash, and next thing you know, you blink and the Cavs are up 30. Go back to game 3. The Cavs were down. It was 20-5 when the starters came out. And Ty Jerome and DeAndre Hunter led I'm not kidding, 20-0 run in the 5 minutes afterwards because Miami's second unit couldn't compete. Indiana's got a pretty darn good bench. Toppin, Matherin, McConnell, Jarris Walker, Ben Shepherd. Sometimes they start Nemhard and Neesmith. Sometimes one of those guys is coming off the bench. They got some dudes. And I'd still pick Cleveland's bench if you were giving the advantage one way or the other. But it's not a gigantic gap. It's not a landslide like it was against Miami. So the Cavs still have the advantage there, but I do think it's negated to a level that on any given night, Indiana's bench could certainly outplay Cleveland's. When you look at the offense, Indiana has the capability to get scorching hot from three at any given moment. They have a lot of streaky shooters, and their variance is much bigger than Cleveland's. I think Cleveland's the more consistent offense, and Cleveland's highs are just as high as Indiana's. Cleveland's lows are higher than Indiana's lows. But Indiana has this wide range where they can score 160 points in a regular season 48-minute game without going to overtime in a demolition derby of the Washington Wizards. And then they can be held to 94 points the following night because some of these threes aren't falling. Cleveland against Miami, I thought did a really, really, really good job of taking Tyler Hero out of the equation. They forced Tyler Hero to beat them 1-on-2 because Cleveland was so gung-ho on helping off anyone else on the court to cut off driving lanes to Tyler Hero, to force him to be a passer. And that's just not his game. And I think that's a big reason why he struggled. When Miami was in their base offense and Cleveland would send a second help defender, sometimes trapping him off pick and rolls, sometimes blitzing him and forcing him to make that early pass. But for the most part, they played the pick and roll straight up. And when he drove, they would send a help side defender and try to force him left too, which I thought was a really smart strategy. He's much better pulling up off the dribble, going right than he is going left. The numbers bear that out. But unlike Tyler Hero, Tyrese Haliburton's wired a different way. If you overhelp on Haliburton, his natural inclination is not to stop and pop. It's to pass. And unlike Miami, Indiana has shooters on the perimeter. Against Miami, you were fine with Tyler Hero making those passes because you were perfectly fine with Davion Mitchell and Hayward Highsmith and Nikola Jovic taking open corner threes. You would live with that all day. Kenny Atkinson talked about how Miami basically played right into their hand defensively. But Indiana could actually make Cleveland pay if they force Haliburton into being a passer. In a weird way, I actually think Cleveland, from a defensive standpoint, should try and make Haliburton a scorer. I understand that he's a talented player, and he's probably in conversation to make third-team All-NBA this season. He started out slow and has got much better as the season progressed. But I think Indiana's offense is at its absolute best when Haliburton has 17, 18 points and 13, 14 assists. When teams are helping and he is dishing, getting other players involved, and if they're making shots, it just helps everything flow in a more coherent fashion. They have enough scorers and they have enough shooters on the perimeter that if they start making shots, they can go supernova like that. We talk about all the Cavaliers we've seen this season from Cleveland. I don't know what the Indiana equivalent to that is, but they've had multiple games throughout the season where next thing you know, you look up and they have 25, 26 threes as a team. And they're at their best when they making up numbers here, 52 shots and have 39 assists, 40 assists. They're an unselfish group. They'll make the extra pass. They actually remind me a lot of Cleveland from an offensive standpoint. Not in the schematics and not in the execution. Indiana plays faster. They're a lot more pick and roll reliant than Cleveland is. They like to attack with Siakam in the high post in a way that Cleveland doesn't like to use Mobley or Jared Allen. Hunter's probably their best in that role. So it's not the same process to get to the shots they want, but they're an unselfish bunch that likes to get a foot in the paint and kick and then attack the rotations. We've said that many times this season with Cleveland. If you were to strip down all the bells and whistles and look at the most basic principle of what the Cavaliers and Kenny Atkinson want to do offensively, it is get a foot in the paint, force the defense to react, and then attack the reaction. That's the most basic way to describe what Cleveland wants to do. And they do that 2-3 times a possession, and by that third rotation, the defense is so jumbled that they end up with Darius Garland on a center on the perimeter, or Donovan Mitchell attacking a power forward that in no way, shape, or form can keep up with Donovan on the perimeter. That's why they get so many good looks in the paint, and that's why they generate so many open threes. That's how they generate so many corner threes. The Cavs finished third in the NBA this season on corner threes attempted, corner threes per game, and fourth in corner three percentage. It's the best shot in basketball. And only one team in the NBA was better than Cleveland in those metrics in terms of overall efficiency on those corner threes. It wasn't the Pacers, but they're also top 5 in just about all of those same categories. And they also like to get to the paint and kick. So I do think it's a classic who's going to dictate pace kind of series here. Because Indiana wants to run. Cleveland wants to play a little slower. And Indiana only plays one traditional big in Miles Turner. Pascal Siakam is a 4. He's a very good player, but he's not your big, bruising, traditional power forward. And neither is Evan Mobley, but Evan's got about 3 inches and about 15, 20 pounds on Siakam. So will Cleveland send extra guys to the offensive glass where they have a size advantage? Or because they know Indiana wants to get out in transition at every opportunity, well, they send guys back. There's got to be a balance. You want to take advantage of your size on offense, use the boards to your advantage, get extra opportunities, get extra points in the paint, second chance points. But you also don't want to sacrifice your transition defense. Do you send 2? Do you send more when your 2 bigs aren't together? Do you send guys to the glass based on Indiana's lineup? When they make their first rotations, Miles Turner comes out and Obi Toppin comes in. They don't have a traditional big in that lineup. Is that when you send extra guys to the glass? It's going to be a chess match. Kenny Atkinson should be the coach of the year this season. This is not his first playoff rodeo, but he certainly doesn't have nearly as much playoff experience as Rick Carlisle, the guy on Indiana's bench. In fact, Rick Carlisle coached more postseason games last year alone than Kenny Atkinson has in his entire career as a head coach. So I'm not saying there's a coaching advantage one way, but Carlisle certainly has the experience edge, while Atkinson has the 2024, 2025, what have you done for me lately edge. When I look at this series top to bottom, I see a lot of similarities between these two teams. I see a lot of ways in which Cleveland is slightly better than Indiana, but it's not by a landslide. I see ways where Indiana can expose some of Cleveland's weaknesses, and I see even more ways I think Cleveland can expose what the Pacers don't do so well. I think this series is going to come down to who makes more threes. As silly and basic as that sounds, both these teams do such a good job generating threes that which team is going to be the one that converts on more of those good looks and more of those open opportunities. I think one last thing to talk about and one last thing to watch before I make my official prediction here is late game execution. And you saw against Milwaukee in the last series how Indiana in games 1, games 4, and game 5 had to execute in the clutch in the most crucial possessions of the game to get buckets. And how did they do that? They went 5 out and let Haliburton attack. And if the Cavs are playing a lineup, let's just say they're starting 5, for example, they've changed their closing lineup so many times that it's impossible to predict who will actually be out on the court. Hunter, Jerome, Strus, Allen. You know you'll have Mobley, Mitchell, and Garland. The other 2 are a rotating cast of characters. Who draws that assignment? The Bucks tried to put Giannis out there on the perimeter against them, and twice in game 5. Once at the end of regulation, and once in overtime for the game-sealing bucket, Haliburton got past Giannis. There was no help protection, no rim protection. Brook Lopez was off the court. And he was able to get the game-tying layup and an and one that made it a 1-point game in overtime. Well, the Cavs feel comfortable leaving Mitchell or Garland on an island against Haliburton. Strus. If the Pacers get the switch, what do? If he gets past Allen or Mobley? Do you help and live with an open 3 from someone else? Or do you let Haliburton take the shot? When the Cavs have the ball late in the stretch, late in the clutch, who are they going to? Darius was their most efficient clutch player this season. Donovan's the guy that has scored the most in the biggest moments. Evan Mobley might be their biggest mismatch against Indiana's defense. It's a fascinating one to watch. But we just talked about it for 20 minutes, and we have 30 seconds left in the stream, so let's make our official predictions. I think this is going to be a very competitive series. I think of the games, 7 potential, I think we'll see 1 blowout. We'll see 1 game that was closer by the final score than it ever really felt. We're going to see 3 or 4 games that I think come down to the wire. And the Cavaliers with home court advantage, and with all the experience this season of being the best clutch team, not just in the NBA in 2024, 2025, but based off net rating, offensive efficiency, defensive rebounding, one of the best clutch teams in the history of the league. I just trust those guys down the stretch to get a bucket and a stop more than I trust the Indiana Pacers. I think this will be close. I think it'll be competitive, but I'm going with the Cavs in 6 as my official prediction. That's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Cavaliers Weekly here on the Bleacher Report app. We appreciate every single one of you guys for tuning in. I'm looking at the numbers right now, record-breaking numbers on the stream for Cavs season, which means we are getting closer and closer to the big dream here, to the end goal, which is the Cavaliers in the NBA Finals and hopefully hoisting the Larry O'Brien Trophy. If you liked what you heard today, make sure you follow me on Twitter at MikeLucasTV. You can also find me on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. 12 more wins to go for Cleveland if they want to be called NBA champions. But to do that, 4 of them have to come against the Indiana Pacers. That's going to wrap it up for today's stream. We appreciate you tuning in. Game 1 set for Sunday. If Houston forces a Game 7, Cavs tip off at 6. If Golden State closes out Houston, tip off for Game 1 at 8 p.m. But it's on TNT, so you get a nationally televised game regardless. Remember, follow me on Twitter. Hit that like button. Tell your friends to download the Bleacher Report app. And we'll see you next week for another